Freehold in 5 years.
If you can own a property outright, depending upon where it is, you could be earning anywhere from $20,000 to $30,000 net income out of that. It's not a get-rich-quick scheme. It's a get-rich scheme.
Rob Flux, founder of the Property Developer Network, shares with us how you can potentially have a freehold property in a fraction of the time by mastering the skill of property development.
Own that in a very compressed timeline is very hard. Investing works, it just takes a lot longer, whereas property development, you can accelerate it.
It's not a case of just work harder, work smart. That's where I really think the gold is.
We are working hard, but the working hard is working smart.
Walking us through the scenarios of getting into a freehold property in potentially less than 5 years instead of the traditional 30-year mortgage.
There's a pattern that happens in every single suburb as it goes.
3 different deals that you'd be doing to pull this together.
Learn to identify the risk. Learn to put the management plan in place. Then manage the plan. The duration of the bell curve will change upon how quickly the population is growing in that area.
So you're going from a 1 into 2 to a 1 into 4. How does that segue happen?
Well, the first thing you've got to do is...
If you've ever wanted to learn how developers force massive value onto a property and potentially create enough equity to be completely freehold, you're going to enjoy this episode. My name's Todd Sloan. This is the Pizza and Property Podcast, and you're listening to my chat with Rob Flux.
Rob Flux, how you going?
Mate, I am fantastic.
Mate, this is good to have you back on. We're talking about something very exciting. Freehold in 5 years. And as much as we're kind of talking about like a property freehold, that's not really what this strategy is about though, is it? This is about more so creating multiples.
Correct. So I guess in the things that I teach, I'm trying to teach people how they can be potentially financially free in 5 years, but we're going to work on the premise of how do we just get one? And we're going to try and spitball, how do we compare investing versus developing and compare the pair.
Well, and this is what I really like about this, because I mean it's essentially 3 parts to this process, or 3 different deals that you'd be doing to pull this together. And I'm sure there's plenty of different ways that it can happen, but in the example that we're talking about, but it's something that I just played with before because I got a little bit curious. And I thought if you could do this in around 5 years, which is sounding like, again, from what you said, you can do it in less potentially, correct?
Potentially, yes.
Okay, but let's even just say 5 years, because that's still really quick. If you were to have a $700,000 house and pay that off in 5 years, now I've done this, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments.
Well, let's pretense this. Most people are trying to pay it off in 20 or 30.
True.
So we're trying to compress that 20 or 30 year timeline down. That's where your numbers are going to come from.
And so if you were to compress it from 20 or 30 into 5 years, the mortgage repayments would then jump all the way up to $13,697 a month.
Have you got that cash, mate?
Yeah, a week, mate.
And that's the challenge. So from an investment perspective, trying to own that in a very compressed timeline is very hard.
It's huge.
Investing works. It just takes a lot longer to do the process. Whereas property development, you can accelerate it.
And that's why I looked at this and I thought, because that is the simplest way to do it. You want to own your house quicker, pay more off your mortgage. You want to own it in 5 years. And a $700,000 house, that's pretty entry nowadays. So being able to do that, it's not a case of just work harder. It's the work smarter side of things that you're about to unfold. That's where I really think the gold is.
Well, I want to caveat that. You still have to work hard. As a matter of fact, property development actually relies on the fact that you're working hard. It's your knowledge and your sweat equity that actually goes into it to force the value onto the property. So we are working hard, but the working hard is working smart.
So yes, I agree, but the working hard that I was doing math on, $43 an hour, I think is like the average hourly rate now. You'd have to be working something like 500 hours a month just to pay your mortgage in this 5 year period.
In that $13,697
that's a lot harder
per month. That's hard.
And there's not even food on the table. That's just paying the mortgage.
Well, I'm not sure who coined this expression, but choose your hard.
Well, yeah, I do like that. What is it? It's like eating salad's hard, being overweight's hard. Which hard do you want? Choose your hard. I think it's a Goggins one, isn't it?
I'm not sure where it comes from, but either way, we're faced with big decisions all the time, and it's always which hard do I want?
Very much agree. So do you want to get into deal number 1 first, or is there something else you wanted to kind of set the stage with?
Well, let's set the scene. Now, for anyone who's been following us on these podcasts before, we're going to cover some ground that we've covered before, but for those who are first-time listeners, it's important that we actually cover this. Property developers aim for a very specific amount of profit on cost. typically it's 20% profit on cost that we actually aim for. So if we have that 20% profit on cost as our deal size, then there's a magic formula that says if I do a deal of 6, that means when I pay down, well, sell off 5, it will pay off the costs and I can own 1 outright.
Makes sense.
So that's what we're really trying to get to. But we always have to start with the end in mind. If 6 is what I'm aiming for, then how do I learn how to do 6? Well, the first thing you've got to do is learn how to do 4. And how do I learn how to do 4? Well, I've got to first learn how to do 2. And so in 3 deals, it is possible to go 1 into 2, 1 into 4, 1 into 6, and then sell 5, keep 1.
Okay. And so 1 into 2, I'm assuming this isn't about splitting the land and just selling the land then, because if you're wanting to actually build 6, you want to start learning that building process as well.
Well, there's a couple of elements to this. So if you're doing a pure land subdivision and selling as land, if you sell 6, if you're doing still land, you'll own the land free and clear.
Yeah, okay.
But what we're trying to do is own a property free and clear.
Yeah.
So build on 6 houses.
It's a bit trickier to put tents on there and rent them out.
But you don't have to sell as vacant land. You could put a house on that. So you could 1 into 2 subdivision and put 2 houses, 1 into 4 subdivision, put 4 houses, 1 into 6 subdivision, put 6 houses. Or you could do a duplex, then a 4-pack, then a 6-pack. Either way, 6 of something is what we're aiming for.
Why don't we start with 1 into 2? How does this generally work? Can you kind of take us from a bit of a start to finish on this?
Well, the first thing you've got to do is learn your trade. A lot of people think this is a get-rich-quick scheme, and it's not a get-rich-quick scheme. It's a get-rich scheme. But we've got to learn the trade. How do we actually learn how to become a property developer? Now, investors will put a small amount of effort into choosing the area, and they let the market do the work. What we've got to do is we've got to use our knowledge, our effort to force value onto the property. So you have to take the time to learn to do that. Now,
Makes sense.
In order to do that, the process to learn that, to give it any justice, you need to put somewhere in the vicinity of about 15 hours a week into the process. If you do that, it'll take you about 6 months to become competent. Now, competent is not confident.
Just before we move on from that, when you say 15 hours a week, how do you come to that figure? What are you doing in the 15 hours roughly as an overview?
Well, that changes as you go through different phases of learning. Okay, so you first have to learn how to crawl, and then you're going to learn how to walk, and then you're going to learn how to run. So each phase is going to be slightly different. So firstly, understanding how to assess the market. Where are the opportunities actually going to be? How do I actually become it and find an area that actually it's going to work? How do I then become an area expert? Then I've got to then start to farm.
Okay.
So it's going to take you a while to get to the point of farming. You don't just lob onto realestate.com and try to buy a development site. That's a surefire way of blowing yourself up. So we want to take the time to learn the trade. So you don't become a doctor without putting your 8 years of uni in. Here we're putting a lot less time, but same concept applies.
And potentially getting paid more than a doctor if you do it right.
Well, a lot of doctors invest in some of the projects that we do, mate.
Okay, so as far as the 1 into 2 is concerned, you're looking at investing anywhere between around that 15 hours a week, but you're saying start it small. Understand that there's going to be a knowledge gap that needs to be filled here. So competent and confident, 2 different things.
Correct.
When are you starting to move into that confidence phase? Because as much as we're comparing 1 into 2, it looks small because we're comparing it to 1 into 6. 1 into 2 is still not it's still a big deal.
So I touched on before, 6 months to become competent, okay? But we actually go through a few phases of learning, no matter what you're doing. So there's 4 phases of learning that everybody does. So first phase, you are unconsciously incompetent. I don't know what I don't know. Then you go to conscious incompetence. Suddenly I realize how much I don't know, and it starts to become very, very overwhelming at that point in time. Okay, and that happens very, very fast in the process, I can assure you. Then you go to conscious competence. That is, you know what to do, but you have to think about it every single time. Then lastly is unconscious competence. That is, you don't even think about it. It's just instilled in what you do.
It's like autopilot.
It's like autopilot. So you're going to get to like phase, I guess, 2 of that, where you're consciously incompetent. That's going to happen about month 1 in the process. You're suddenly going to get overwhelmed with, oh my goodness, there's so much to learn.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be persistent. You have to have some determination. You have to consistently put something towards this every single day.
I feel like if you know it's coming, it's not as bad.
Oh no. The headspace is the thing that will muck you up so bad it's not funny.
Yeah.
50% is skill, 50% is headspace. And as soon as you start to see that, people get overwhelmed very fast. And it's about regular, consistent, repeated process. If I do something towards my goal every day, one email, one phone call, one something, then I will progress. If I wait once to the end of the week and try to put my 15 hours in on that day, then I'm scratching my head trying to go, what did I do last week?
Mm-hmm.
So it's consistency that will actually get you there.
It's like the whole thing, if you ever want to start like reading a book every night, don't commit to reading for an hour because you'll always find an excuse not to do it for an hour. But if you just commit to reading one page,
correct,
anyone can find 30 seconds to read a page. So yeah, I hear what you're saying. Okay.
So if you've read the book Atomic Habits,
I have,
then it's talking about making micro commitments. So you don't commit to go to the gym, you commit to putting your sneakers on. And then if you've got your sneakers on, you kind of feel funny walking around the house with your sneakers on, so you actually go to the gym.
I needed to take that a step further for some reason because I still went back to bed with my sneakers on. I had to send a photo, I think you and I have talked about this, to a friend proving I was at the gym. Otherwise, I actually tried that exact thing. I was like, oh, I can sleep with these on, it's fine.
Yeah. So we've not finished our timeline here. 6 months, we are competent. That is, we're at phase 3 here, conscious competence. What we really want to get to is unconsciously competent.
And is that still happening on project 1, or are you?
We haven't started project 1 yet. We're not into the process here at all. We're in learning phase.
Okay.
Right. So the thing that gets you confident is practice and repetition, looking at many, many sites. So doing lots of site analysis, doing lots of feasibilities, doing lots of negotiations. And every single time you're going to make mistakes.
This is almost like a paper trading.
It is paper trading, and you pretty much stole my punchline.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
We could do that again.
No. Let's go there. The point of it is you're going to make a lot of mistakes. I want you to make mistakes because you learn from the mistake, but you only lose money on getting into a shitty deal. So if I stuff up the site analysis, I'm not in a deal. If I start up my feasibility, I'm not in a deal. If I stuff up the negotiation, I'm not in a deal. So all of that is what messes with your mind, because you're going to go through those learning phases of how do I do that better? Now, you go overcome that. Somewhere around the 9-month mark, we start to kick in the confidence because we've learnt a lot of those mistakes. We've reapplied the lessons. We're now at a point where we go, okay, I'm pretty confident here. We're still having to put effort into the thinking phase and that sort of thing. But now we're effectively deal ready. Now, do we get a deal? Well, that depends on how many deals we've put in the funnel. So at 9 months, we're kind of deal ready. So somewhere between month 9 and month 15 is typically where we see most people land their first deal. Anyone who thinks property development is a get-rich-quick scheme, when you tell them, hey, it could be somewhere between 9 and 15 months before you get into your first deal.
You've lost a large chunk of the room.
Correct.
Yeah.
Then you've got to run the deal. Now, depending upon what the deal is, it could be anywhere from 9 months to 24 months to run. So by the time you actually get to the first payday, it could be somewhere between 18 months and 3 years' time. And so a lot of people are just put off by how long it's going to take for the learning phase and then how long it's going to take for that first payday. But, and here's the catch, once you've gone to that effort, you don't need to learn it again. Now you can start to apply it again and again and again. And so there's a hockey stick that starts to happen at that 2.5 to 3 year mark where you can start to run many deals at a time and kick in pretty hard. Then you start to have payday after payday after payday very, very fast.
At what point then, you're saying we're starting at month 9 to 15 for the first deal, At what point are you starting farming? Because that's a term obviously you and I are familiar with, but some people might be thinking, where'd the farm come into this?
About the 6-month mark.
Okay. And farming, if you want to sort of open that up a little bit about finding deals?
Yeah, so it's about trying to find areas where there's lots of opportunity, where there's evidence that other people have done it before you, where there's proof those people have been profitable, and there's still demand for you to do it. Now, I might do a little drawing here because there's a sweet spot where deals start to work. So what I'm going to draw here, I'm going to try to talk it through for those of you who are actually on the podcast. There's a pattern that happens in every single suburb as it goes through a development cycle. So there's a point in time where nobody's doing any deals, to everybody's doing deals, to deals don't make sense anymore, and it disappears at the tail.
Okay.
So it's very much a bell curve. So if you look at a bell curve, and hopefully I can draw a little bit well for my bell curve.
Works, there's a bell curve.
Now, how the duration of the bell curve will change depending upon how quickly the population is actually growing in that particular area. But there's going to be one person who is doing deal number one. So this guy here, we're going to call him the market maker. Now, he's got no idea if the deal's going to work at all. He doesn't know if what the finished product's going to sell for. He's either super intelligent or he's just rolling the dice. Now, we don't want to be that person rolling the dice. We want to be the person super intelligent. And eventually, when we get very good at this, we can be that market maker. But today, deal number one, we are not market maker. Then you'll see a whole bunch of savvy people who see the market maker make money and they start to dial in. So we're going to call these guys the early adopters. Now, at this point here, Joe Public starts to get involved. Now, Joe Public doesn't do the research that we're trying to do, and they start to get emotional. They think that every deal is a winner. They see all this activity starting to happen. At that point, the market actually peaks, and then Joe Public, still not very smart, is still getting in on the other side of this bell curve.
Now, they don't know the difference between FISO and FOMO.
Correct. That's a good way of actually pitching that, by the way. So at this point, I'm going to call these guys latecomers. And then you start to have the people that are listening to the taxi drivers. And so down here, we've got the ill-informed. Now, there's activity on the way up, and there's activity on the way down. And so a lot of people see activity and think, oh, there's development happening, it must be great. The problem is everyone's making money on the way up, and everyone on the way down is trying to stop losing money. Now, if you're a latecomer, you've got a very good chance of still walking away with some profit, but not as much as you hoped. If you're the ill-informed, you've probably lost your shirt. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to pick this little sweet spot right here, where there's enough evidence of the early adopters getting in, but not enough of Joe Public getting in to cook the deal.
And this is one of the things, obviously, that you're really focusing on in that 6 and 9 to 15 month learning phase.
We're trying to find the areas where that sweet spot actually happens.
Gotcha.
And if we can do that, then we've got the evidence that other people have done it, the early adopters and the market maker, and we've got the proof that they're profitable because we can see what the buy price was, we can see what the sell price is, we can do the math to go, well, they made money. We can see that there's still demand in the area and there's enough, I guess, left in the tank that we can actually push it over the hill. And we're actually wanting Joe Public to start piling in at this point because he's going to push up the sale price of the finished product.
You ever been a market maker or you steer away from it? Too risky?
Well, here's what happens. When you're doing that 1 into 2, it's really easy to see the complete bell curve because there's so many people that can A, afford it, and B, the deal size of the amount of land that is capable of doing a 1 into 2 or a duplex. There's heaps of it. So you can see that bell curve really clearly.
Okay.
So getting to learn that market is key and critical to the process. Now, you want to step up a deal size. You want to step up to the 4-pack. At this point, there's less land that is big enough to do it. There's less people with the money to do it. And there's less people with the skills to do it. So now the bell curve starts to become more of a dotted line and you start to become the early adopter. And then as you go up a deal size again, less land of that size, less people with the money, less evidence. So you start to become approaching the market maker. So the bigger the deal, the more likely you want to be that you're going to be the market maker. So we don't want to jump into a big deal day one, because that's how you royally stuff it.
Yeah. Yeah, if you don't have the skill set and things go right, you're lucky. If they go wrong, you're out of the game.
If you're rolling the dice, you don't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
But if you've done multiple projects and you've learnt how to read the market, you can see these trend lines and you can see all the things that happen before the trend line even kicks in. Now you can back yourself.
Okay, so as we start going from deal number 1 into deal number 2, which is a 1 into 2, then going into a 1 into 4, I want you to open up a little bit more about mindset, because I feel like, and you've talked about this on the show before, you and I have had personal conversations about this, when you've really said, like, if you can do 1 into 2, you can do 1 into 12. If you can do 1 into 12, you can do 1 into 20. And I know that, but like 1 into 20, and I'd like to think I'm pretty experienced in real estate, not in development, but in real estate, it still doesn't, like, it feels like a huge deal, Rob.
I'm going to say how quickly you jumped to that 1 into 20 is probably a little bit too aggressive. But if you let's slow it down a little bit, and do the I guess the hypothetical that I said, 2, then 4, then 6. So I'm going to ask you some loaded questions. Okay, let's just say that we're doing a duplex, then a 4-pack, then a 6-pack. Okay. When you go talk to your town planner on the 2-pack and you talk to the town planner on the 4-pack, do you spend any more time talking to the town planner?
I can't imagine so.
No, but he puts together a bigger report and you pay a little bit more for him to do the work.
Okay, yep.
Now, when you go talk to the architect, do you spend any more time with the architect?
I can't see why, unless for some reason it's some kind of a different shape and one of them is different, but
So the architect does more work.
Okay.
And so when you start to apply this to all of your consultants, it's an incremental amount of effort that you're stepping up. But you've learnt the skills on the previous project that you're actually then just applying again. Now, there's only a couple of strategies where this starts to become scalable, and that's really the key to this. So what can I do that I can start small and then scale? So we touched on land subdivisions and we touched on townhouses, and they have different problems to solve, but I'm going to go through the mechanism. 1 into 2, 1 into 4, 1 into 6, 10, 12. I can build an entire street. I can build an entire suburb. I can build a city, learning how to do subdivisions. So it's very scalable. I can start small and step up. With the townhouse type approach, I can do a duplex, then a 4-pack, then a 6-pack, and I'm scaling out in order to do that. If I want to do apartments, I can do units at grade. I can do 2 stories, 3 stories, 5, 20. As you start to scale up, you then have to start scaling down with basements. The key is we want scale. Now, with the scale, once we choose a path, every one of those paths have different problems to solve. And when we learn how to solve the problem on the first deal, we just reapply that skill. So I'll use the example. Land subdivisions, pretty much 5 problems I need to solve. The first problem, water, sewer, stormwater, telecommunications, electricity. 5 problems I need to solve.
Okay.
Now, when I do 1 into 4, I've still got the same 5 problems I've got to solve. Now, I might have one extra problem, which is a shared driveway.
Okay.
I might. But I'm only adding one new skill when I step up a deal size if I stay on the same path. Now, if I step up again to another deal size, the shared driveway might no longer be a shared driveway. Now it might be a road or a partial road. And as I step up another deal size, now I might have to put what they call biodetention basins. But we're only adding one extra skill to the process, and everything else we've reapplied. Now, if I change tack and look at like the townhouse type approach, different problems. So now I have to do car parking, turning circles, garden space, shadowing, the flow of the building. And when you start to learn the problem on the first project, you just reapply it again and again and again. And that's the key to the scalability side of things, by choosing one path and sticking to the one path.
Okay, so I'm looking at this through the lens of lots more property, lots more money involved, feels like lots more risk, lots more like just the general uncomfort of the project. Whereas you're just pushing that all to the side and going, well, don't even think big. Just think about the problems that you're solving. And then if there's a difference between solving it once here, twice here, 5 times there, like it's going to be a pretty small difference. It's not going to be this huge difference.
Yeah, there's one key word that you said there that I want to really dive into. No, risk.
Okay.
Now, Warren Buffett famously says, risk only comes from not knowing what you're doing. Now, when you were a child, you were taught crossing the road is dangerous, correct?
Yes.
Then you were taught to look left, look right, look left again.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can, A, you identified the risk, B, you've got a management plan, and C, if you keep watching the car as you cross the road, you can cross safely. Is the car any less dangerous?
No.
Now, if you apply that a little further, now you can press the button and wait for the little green man, and now you can find crossings. So there's many, many ways to solve the same problem.
Well, I guess if the car is replaced with a truck, the way that you solve it isn't
Is
any
same.
different, but the risk is bigger. Yeah, okay, I get you. That's a good analogy.
So that's what we're going to try and do here. This is the first 6 to 9 months of what we're trying to do is that learning phase. Learn to identify the risk.
Mm-hmm.
Learn to put the management plan in place.
Mm-hmm.
Then manage the plan.
So tell me if I'm jumping ahead too soon, but how do things then change from deal 1? Because remembering this is leading us to freehold within 5 years, potentially even less. When you're moving then from deal 1 into deal 2, so you're going from a 1 into 2 to a 1 into 4. How does that segue happen? Like, how do we sort of get into that?
Well, there's I might actually do a 5-year timeline that I can actually draw on the page here. I'm going to do year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and year 5. Okay, so that's not drawn to scale, but we've got a 5-year timeline that's actually mapped in here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as I said, deal number 1, we're probably starting somewhere around this 9-month mark. Everything up until that point in time has been the learning phase.
Okay.
Now, depending upon the strategy that we do, that could be anywhere from 9 to 24 months.
Okay.
Okay, so subdivisions are quicker to run. I guess duplex type townhouse could be a little bit longer.
Okay. So this first whole year that you've got here, that's all just basically educating, getting your head in the right space.
Correct. Up until that space, it is learning the process.
Gotcha.
Okay. Now, I did say before, some people will start a little bit later. It could be somewhere between month 9 and month 15 might be their start. But
gotcha.
We're optimistic. We're gonna get into the deal at month 9 because we're overachievers.
Okay, love it.
Now, I'm going to do I guess a townhouse type approach.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so but the same principles that we're going to apply everywhere else. It's going to be just different timings. So that could be, depending upon where we do this, could be a 18-month project up to a 24-month project. So places like New South Wales, Sydney have what they call complying development code, fast track type processes. Okay. So there are opportunities to do that. In other places, like Victoria, for example, you can guarantee it's going to be 24 months. There's no fast track there. All the council approvals are much slower, but we're going to just do this as a fairly typical type approach.
Okay.
Now, if I was an investor, I'd be wanting to buy the next deal as quick as humanly possible, correct?
Yeah.
The same approach happens with a developer. So we're going to try and pick up the next deal about 6 months later, give or take. And then the next deal a little bit later.
Okay, if this gets chopped up into a reel, I know the first thing we're going to get in the comments here is how are you financing this? How is this even coming together with like everything overlapping?
Well, let's first look at the what. Once we know the what,
mm-hmm.
then we can look at the where. And when we know the where, then we can work out the how. So let's just stick on the what for the moment because I want to show that it can be done.
Okay.
Then we're gonna dissect the how part a little bit later.
Okay.
Okay. Now, mapping this out, we said that this was going to be a 1 into 2,
mm-hmm.
and this was going to be a 1 into 4, and this is going to be a 1 into 6. Which means that at the end of this one, if we do this dotted line, we should own 1 outright at that point. And a very messy drawing, but so at that point, we're kind of 3 and a bit years into the process. We've well and truly achieved our 5-year milestone that we're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
But now if we continue that and we map out the next one, again, that's going to be a 1 into 6 type approach there potentially. And now that's another one that's owned outright. And at this point, we've been scaling up 1 into 2, 1 into 4, 1 into 6. We did another 1 into 6. We could potentially keep scaling and keep accumulating, or we could stay on the same deal size. But either way, we've got 1, potentially 2, potentially 3 in that 5-year mark that we can own outright.
So I've got to ask then, why wouldn't you, if you had the skill, you could upscale it, why wouldn't you start going, no, I don't do 1 into 6 anymore. I just do 1 into 12s, 1 into 20s. Or is it just a matter of, well, whatever the deal, what deal you find?
You can, but it needs a lot more capital to actually start to do that.
Right.
And one of the parts do this where a lot of people kind of doing traditional investing, they're looking at everything through that 20 or 30 year buying type lens. I don't have the income to service the loan in order to do that.
Okay.
When you're looking at the property development world, you're not looking at serviceability anymore. We're looking at commercial style lending. We're looking at the merits of the deal. Does the deal make sense? Because we're getting in and out in much shorter timelines. And because of that, our lenders take a very different view of the process.
So I can already see how at the very start of the episode you're saying, like, technically, yes, this is how to go freehold in 5 years, in less than 5 years from what you're saying here, if you were to really overlay these and stack them on top of each other. But like you're saying, that's not the goal. The goal is to continue this, to build a portfolio with freehold properties.
Correct. And the point of the process and a very distinction between developing and investing, we are still investors. We just manufacture it at a wholesale rate. We're not buying it after another developer has developed it. So we're the one creating and manufacturing the profit, and it's the profit that actually then disappears. Now, I'll give you another analogy. Now, this is going to work much better for anyone on YouTube, but when you get a balloon and you pull it out of the packet, it's flat, correct?
Just for anyone on iTunes right now, Rob isn't actually holding a balloon, but keep going.
No. But the balloon, when you pull it out of the packet, is flat.
Yes. Yeah.
And when you try to blow it up the very first time, you have to breathe into it really hard and you have to put a lot of effort into it in order to stretch that balloon.
Yeah.
But when you let the air out of it, does it go back to flat?
Well, yeah.
No.
What do you mean no?
No.
What kind of balloons do you have?
It's never perfectly flat. It's actually got a little bit of a bubble that's still left in it.
Okay, then yes. I see. Yeah,
Because it's been pre-stretched. Now that's our profit. Okay, so we're going to stretch it with debt, and then we're going to shrink it down by selling down, and then that's our profit. Now the second time you blow up the balloon, it's been pre-stretched. It's easier to do. Now when you stretch it at the second time, you can stretch it further, can blow it up further, and it's easier to do. And when you let it down, again, it doesn't go back to that previous bulb. It's now a slightly bigger bulb. Then you do that a third time, and eventually you're getting to the point where what is left over when you collapse and pay down your debt is your freehold property.
Did you get out of breath when you were coming up with this theory?
No.
No? No, but I like that because it just illustrates the point of something might be hard to begin with, but it will get easier as you continue. And the way that you're overlaying this here, basically showing that this is a lot in the first 12 months, 9 months, 15, however long you're doing it, it's a lot to soak in. It's a lot of effort to put in the beginning. But as you continue stretching this and as you continue going down this path, it's going to get easier and easier.
Yes, and the skills that you're trying to learn for deal number 2 are just incremental on deal number 1. And that's why it gets easier because you're applying, hey, what did I do right and what did I do wrong? I'm going to get better at the things that I did wrong and I'm going to double down on the things that I did right. And by sticking to one path, one strategy, whatever the strategy is, they'll work. I'm not biased one way or the other. But if you stick to that one strategy that's scalable, then you're going to get better and better and better. And that's where you start to get the hockey stick at the end. So there's the potential that the last deal that actually sits here is the ability to then step into a 1 to 12 type approach. Now, if you do that, terrible handwriting for anyone who's watching online, I don't know what I just drew there. But at that point, you might be able to keep 2. Now, if you can own a property outright, depending upon where it is, you could be earning anywhere from $20,000 to $30,000 net income out of that. So we can show here that the potential is to actually not own one property, as per the title of the show. The potential is 2, 3, maybe 4 properties at the end of that 5-year period. But the hard work happens at the front, and that's where a lot of people are afraid, is they don't want to put the hard work in.
Because what if it doesn't actually pay off?
And the number of people that I see who give up before they actually get into that first deal, they put a lot of effort in and they go, too hard, I don't want to try.
What was that, 3 feet from gold you were talking about earlier?
3 feet from gold. Napoleon Hill, who wrote the book Think and Grow Rich, has another story which is 3 feet from gold, where there was a gentleman who was, I guess, going all different countries and all different continents searching for gold mines because he wanted instant success. And he figured if he could find a giant gold nugget, he'd actually get there. And then in the end, he gave up and he went home and he found a gold nugget in his backyard.
3 feet from it the whole time.
He was 3 feet from it the whole time. And that's what tends to happen. The mindset side of things plays tricks on us. And when it's so hard to actually learn the process, we want to give up.
This is sounding good, don't get me wrong, but I'm still looking at this as how are you funding this? There's several deals stacked on top of each other, and there's obviously a whole totally different level of skill, whether that's private funding, whether that's, like you were saying before, the commercial type financing. But I know before we get into that how side of things, because I'm assuming, and I think I'm assuming pretty right, the where is going to be critically important on this.
Absolutely. When we touched on this a little bit earlier, we're looking for the bell curve of where those deals start to make sense.
Okay.
And as we start to step up our deal sizes, where a 1 into 2 works will be a completely different area to where a 1 into 4 works, which will be a completely different area to where a 1 into 6 works. So the what is our 5-year plan. The where, we then have to look at deal by deal. Where are we going to find heaps of opportunities where there's evidence of other people doing it and proof that those people are profitable?
Okay.
And so we're going to be walking around different parts of, I guess, the city, depending upon what we are actually trying to achieve. And so where a subdivision works and where a duplex or a townhouse works is going to be completely different type approach. So what you're doing and where you do it is very much based on the deal itself. You don't just choose a suburb and go, hey, what can I force in here? But rather you want to use the deal strategy and the deal size to determine where it actually makes sense.
Yeah, because my mind always thinks in renovating. It's just, you don't just choose a suburb and go, I'd like to renovate houses there. It's like, well, does it work?
Correct.
It's exactly the same thing.
Exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
We're looking at different metrics in order to measure that, but fundamentally, we only want to go into areas where the deals make sense.
So growth nodes and transport corridors. Now, are these terms that are like interchangeable? Like if someone's listening to this in Perth, means exactly the same thing if they're listening to this in Brisbane, or they're all slightly different names? Or?
No, so it's pretty much universal globally.
Oh,
so
wow.
Every city has to be designed in a very particular way.
Okay.
And what happens is, look, the local government, the state government, they've only got a finite amount of resources. It's impossible for them to build all the services they need everywhere. So they need to corral the cats into like an area where it actually makes sense to build hospitals and universities and train lines and all that sort of stuff. And so understanding how a city is designed then starts to tell you where does the density start to make sense.
Before we move on, then, is there anything else about the where that you really wanted to emphasize or leave people with?
The product type itself, what you're trying to achieve, will work in different areas. So if I'm looking to do high rise, then I'm going to be right in the middle of those growth centers.
Makes sense.
If I'm wanting to do medium rise, I'm going to be just outside of those, and quite often it's only a couple of streets. When I'm trying to do mid rise, then again outside of that. So you'll find density at the center of the growth node, and it gets less and less dense as you move a little bit further out.
What is technically high rise? Is it anything over 40 stories or?
That definition changes like city by city and council by council. But
okay.
I'm going to say anything above 8 stories is probably
high rise.
Yeah, because it triggers a whole bunch of different building and construction code things with how you do fire compliance and things like that. So once you get to that point, you are almost certainly building basements, and you're almost certainly having huge fire compliance issues in how you actually deal with it.
Yeah, and you've got to have different sorts of machine rooms and things like that, don't you?
All sorts of things. But,
Yeah, okay.
But that's a wild goose chase. We'll kind of...
Yeah, I was just curious. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm taking us off topic too much there. Okay, so on the how side of things, we're looking at this from a commercial financing point of view, from a funding of private money. Like, how is all of these projects getting stacked over the top of each other and getting paid for?
There's a whole toolbox that you need in order to solve this. There is not one single thing. It's like if you've only got a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail.
I love that saying.
So we need to have a hammer and a screwdriver and a set of pliers and a shifter and all the different things. So there's different challenges you need to solve as you go. So let's break down the kinds of money you need and the different phases that you need it in.
Okay.
Now, if I look at just acquiring a property, so phase one, just acquiring. So that I need deposit to purchase, need serviceability to fund the debt, and I need liquid cash to run the deal. Now, if I'm doing a normal investment, exactly the same problem. If I need to do a reno or anything like that to just spruce it up, the same problems still apply.
Makes sense.
When you get to the construction phase, then you may potentially change from a residential type loan into a construction type loan. And the construction type loan would effectively pay out the residential loan. And now it's less concerned about the serviceability element because it's more concerned about the profitability of the deal. And so that serviceability then starts to disappear.
Okay, so this is where it doesn't matter if you've got an income that can service X loan. It matters, does the deal stack up enough profitability wise to service the bank's appetite to go, there's enough money in that at the end?
Correct. And you transition from the terminology changes between residential and commercial lending. So what was deposit in the residential side of things is now referred to as equity when you get to the construction side of things.
Okay.
Now you're going to need a larger amount of equity.
Like 70-30s, or what are they normally?
70-30, 60-40, depending upon the size of the deal and whether the bank has a risk appetite based on your level of experience for what you're trying to do.
How often do pre-sales come into it?
That's typically if you're using Big Four. If you're using, I guess, the Big Four banks, they will only lend you the money the moment you prove you don't need it. So if you do a pre-sale and sell off the plan, then they know they've got guaranteed exit out of the deal. And when they've got a guaranteed exit out of the deal, then they'll lend you the money. Now, the challenge with that is that a pre-sale typically won't sell for as much as the finished product will. It's going to be based on a lower number. And it's going to take you longer to convince somebody to buy off the plan because they can't touch it, smell it, feel it, they can't walk through it, they can't get emotionally invested in it. So you're going to sell it for a slightly lower price point again.
Doesn't matter how good your renders are.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
And so the bank is happy, but you have effectively lost some revenue by not selling the finished product. So that's if you're dealing with the Big Four. But if you start to deal with some development specialists, development funding specialists, they start to recognize that selling the finished product is actually going to generate more revenue, and it's actually de-risking for them because they know that you can actually generate more revenue. So they won't force the pre-sale as much. Now, they will charge a slightly higher interest rate for that privilege, but you get to move on with the deal straight away. You're not waiting to do 6 months of pre-sales in order to start the process. Instead, you can actually start to break ground straight away. You can still sell off the plan as you're constructing, but now people can actually see that it's actually coming to life. So if you imagine that you're doing a 6-pack and you have to sell off the plan, then the first one, the obvious question, that when are you going to start? Well, I've got 4 more pre-sales I've got to do. Oh, so it's going to be a while.
No one wants to be the first.
Nobody wants to be the first. Now you get the 4th pre-sale. When are you going to start? Mate, you sign this dotted line and we're starting next week.
Yeah.
Right? So the first couple of ones are always hard to get off the line. So if you can get, I guess, the development specialist lenders to actually then allow you to start the construction, then you move much, much, much faster. Now that's one other tool in your toolbox. But then you've got some other creative ways that it can do things. So there's no and low money down type strategies to say, well, I can creatively acquire the property in ways that might defer some of my costs and sometimes even avoid some of the costs altogether in the process.
So you're doing like long settlements or options, that kind of stuff?
All sorts of things. So there's 7 different ways that you can control the property without owning the property and profit from the process. But delayed settlement with early access is one of those. So if you're delaying the settlement, let's just say that you're going to delay it for 12 months. Well, that's 12 months worth of interest you're saving. That's now 12 months of land tax you're saving. That's now 12 months of rates that you're saving. So it's actually possible to go to the vendor and go, look, if time is not important to you, I could use that time for me to go get my approvals and get everything ready for to get to construction phase. And in doing so, the savings that I've got, I'll actually pay more for the property. I'm just going to pass those savings back to you. Now, the vendor selling the property is happy because he's getting more money. You're happy because you've completely eliminated the actual first acquisition phase, so you don't have to get that residential lending phase actually starting to happen. And when you get your development approval in place, you can go straight to construction phase and start to break ground straight away because the deal makes sense. So now the thing that matters the most is now liquid cash and equity in order to construct that second phase.
And so how are you raising the liquid cash then?
Well, some people have cash handy, so those people, that's really easy.
Yeah, pretty easy for them.
But pretty easy. But others tend to raise it through investors, friends, family, that sort of thing, or sometimes the vendor themselves will stay in the deal. So the vendor will go, hang on, well, if I got that much by saving just by holding on, you're going to make some development profit. Can I get a share of that? So sometimes you can actually do a joint venture with the landowner.
And tap into their equity.
Okay. So there's lots of creative ways. The key thing here is to not go, where am I at, and only pick up one tool, right? I don't want to always pick up the hammer every single time. Instead, I want to solve what's the problem the vendor's got. If I know what the problem the vendor's got, I can know which tool to pull out of the toolbox to solve the problem at the time.
I always used to think being a politician, not that I've ever been one, is more about convincing everyone how good a politician you are than actually being a good politician. And I'm just thinking now on the developer side of things, is it almost this like it's so much about being a good deal maker rather than the developing side? Because if you don't have the deal, and like you said, the first kind of 9-15 months, you're learning all the developing, you're learning how all this comes together. But then the skill that it sounds like you would have to continuously sharpen is being the kind of person that pulls everyone together, everything together, all the resource, and actually really creates the deal rather than the developing side. Have I got that right? Or?
Pretty much. So it is very much a people game. And if you can learn how to read people and how to understand what their needs are, then you're going to position what you've got to offer in a way that solves their need. That's the key to being a deal maker. And the running the deal is a process. And most of that process, you're outsourcing to other people. You're outsourcing that to your town planner. You're outsourcing that to your architect. You're outsourcing. And so you're choreographing this. That's the key. Being the deal maker, finding the deal is the hardest part. Everything else, once you've structured that deal together, everything else is just follow the bouncy ball.
So recapping where we're at so far and following that bouncy ball, we're looking at essentially getting a freehold home within 5 years and under from what you're talking about in the example that you just illustrated before. We're doing this from going from a 1 into 2, but we're not jumping straight into it. We're educating ourselves for a good 9 to 15 months. But then once we've got that down pat, we're not waiting for that to finish. We're going, well, we could, but it's just going to take longer. So once the deal is up and running, we're then looking for the next deal, which is then potentially going to be more like a 1 into 4. We're sharpening that skill. We're moving it because, like you said, once you've solved the problem of the water, the electricity, so on and so forth, you're just solving that again. Maybe a little bit more, but not really much more. It's pretty much the same thing. And then it's this overlay, and then as one completes, you've still got 2 more in the pipeline, maybe 3 more in the pipeline. The funding side of things is done from pulling out a different tool depending on what's actually needed. You're not running around with a hammer just trying to do JVs constantly, because maybe that's not going to work with certain deals.
No, you'll scare people off by going, hey, I want a JV. They don't want a JV, right?
Coming back to listening to what they really say, listening to what they need, and then fulfilling that need in a way that's actually going to bring the deal together.
Yeah, and there's fundamentally 4 sets of needs that you need to understand from people's circumstances.
What are these for? I like this.
Here we go. The first one, time. Are they in a hurry or have they got time on their hands? The second one is money. Okay. So do they need all the money right now, or can they wait for some of it? So we're combining money along with the time element. So do they want maximum amount of money, but they have time on their hands, or do they need the money right now? So for example, if I've already bought another property and I'm going to move into that straight away, I probably need the cash in order to settle on the one that I've just bought. But if I've not yet chosen where the next one is, I might need the time in order to go find that one. And I also might want to understand how much money I've got to go spend with.
Okay, makes sense.
So everyone's got a different circumstance, and it's really just understanding that circumstance and go, okay, well, now that I know where that is, I can start to rummage around in my toolbox and go, well, what one works? So the next one, risk. Some people want absolute certainty. Hey, I just want to know exactly what I'm getting. I don't care about anything else. Other people go, I'm happy to have a shared risk and a shared reward because I know that the upside for the profit side of things is really, really key. And the other one is certainty. And certainty and risk are somewhat aligned. You can still give certainty and share some of the risk, but you're going to give them a guaranteed return. And so those 4 elements, time, money, the risk, and the certainty, when you actually map those out, and when you understand where somebody sits, then you know which tool to pull out of your toolbox.
Can you open up a little bit more about the difference between risk and certainty? Because to me, they do feel very mushed together.
They are a little bit rubbery. I'll use that phrase. But if somebody wants certainty, they don't want to have a conditional purchase. They want to know it's exactly going to happen. But they might have the flexibility of time in order to wait for it, and they could give you more time to allow you to actually knock down the house and actually start the construction process, so long as there's a guarantee. The contract says, hey, I want the certainty in order to get out. Now, so they're taking a little bit of risk, but the contract is actually an unconditional contract. So they've got that certainty tick in the box. But because you are now into the construction phase and not into the acquisition phase, you're able to give them more money for that process.
Yeah, gotcha.
Whereas the risk element says, well, actually, I've got equity in my deal, in my property. Am I willing to let you tap into my equity in order to do the funding? And then, in which case, I'm taking some risk. So if I'm going to take some risk, I want some reward.
Okay, that makes sense. And so when you're finding what one of these, or potentially multiple of these, someone that is, I want to say like the vendor, generally it would be the person that's selling, which one they have, I'm assuming there's like a whole series of questions that you ask. There's like kind of like a preloaded conversation that you go through to kind of uncover, like discovery.
Yes, but it's not a script. It's actually just getting to know someone. So asking simple questions like, do you know where you're going to go next? Have you already chosen somewhere that you're already going to go? First question, if you just say, do you know where you're going to go? They go, well, I'm looking to stay in the area. Have you chosen somewhere to live? No, not yet. What does that product start to look like? Now, when we start to ask those questions, it could just be that you're going to be creating the exact product that they're going to look for. Now, if that's the case, then you go, well, why don't you stay in the deal and I'll give you one for free at the end?
Whereas if you get a different response of, yes, actually, we've already got it. And then if another question is, oh, do you need the money from this to close that? Yes, we really do. Well, then you know you're leaning towards time is definitely the important thing.
Absolutely. Now, the money and the time element can also blur as well, similar to the risk and the certainty. So sometimes people need some money urgently, but they can wait for the rest.
Okay.
So they might be behind in their mortgage, for example. They might be $20,000 or $30,000 behind. Now, if you can give them that $20,000 or $30,000, that gets the bank off their back. Now they can relax and they can breathe a bit. They can wait for the rest. Or there might be a medical bill, or they might be, maybe they're moving into an old age home and the old H home might only be 500K to get in, and you might be buying the property for 1.5 or 2 mil, for example. So they want the 500K today, but they don't need the rest till the tail.
Before we start wrapping things up, Rob, there's something that I wanted to talk about, and I feel like for some people this is going to be a bit of an elephant in the room, but I know that you've got I was going to say elephant antidote, but that doesn't make any sense. But basically,
I got a blunderbuss.
What is that?
That's an elephant gun.
Oh, okay. Okay, so you've got a blunderbuss. Or the answer to this question is a tax. You're selling down these properties, and I know that there was a reel that you were in that we did a little while ago, and there was a whole bunch of people going, "Nah, that doesn't work this way. If you're selling off 5 and you're keeping it, you're going to lose it all in tax." There's certain structures, and we have to obviously preface this with, this is absolutely not financial advice. Like, speak to your accountant, but these are some of the questions that you want to start asking if you're going to walk down this path. Can you kind of open up a little bit more about those questions and how it works?
Yeah, I need to caveat the heck out of this. I am not an accountant, and this is not advice, but hopefully I'm giving you enough education that you can actually go and ask some intelligent questions of your accountant.
Absolutely.
And also of your solicitor, because they both talk to entities. So a solicitor will give you, I guess, information with regards to asset protection, and your accountant will give you with regards to your tax minimisation, and you actually need both. Firstly, there's 2 different kinds of tax, and people get them really confused. So there's capital gains tax, which if you're an investor is what you're used to. And as a developer, there's GST, goods and services tax. You can only get charged one at a time. You can't get charged both. So it's which tax is actually going to apply. Now, the ATO has some rules that basically say, if you're going to be adding value and through this development process, you're effectively running a business. So GST is going to be what applies in the development space. But if your intention is to hold one of those to the end, then the percentage, and we said here before 6 properties, we're going to sell 5. Those 5, the GST would apply, but the 6th one, CGT would apply. And so
only when you sell it, though.
Only when you sell it. So long as you pass a litmus test, so the ATO has a litmus test that says, well, you've got an intention to hold it. Prove to me you actually are going to hold it.
Okay.
And so that litmus test is a 5-year mark. So if you sell it inside 5 years, then GST would apply. If you sell it in year 6 onwards, then capital gains tax applies. Right. Now, so hence, if you sell the 5, you're going to pay GST on those, but that's all part of the feasibility. The one you keep, well, if it's owned outright, why would you be selling it? So yes, CGT does apply, but that only kicks in at the moment you sell it. But why sell a property you own outright that's giving you cash forever?
All right, so you're paying the tax and you're working this out in the FISA, the GST side of things, the tax on what you sell. And then as far as like entities and stuff like this, obviously this is something you want to talk to your solicitor, talk to your accountant about, but that's kind of worked into like a company, a trust?
Well, you firstly got to understand before starting the deal, what is your intent? So if my intent is to sell everything, then the structure that I go into that up front might be completely different. It might be a very, very simple, easy structure. If my intent is to keep everything, it might be a very different structure. So as an example, if I'm going to sell everything, it might be a company. But if I'm going to keep everything, well, I want the long-term capital gains tax discounts of a trust. And so very different structuring. Where it gets messy is I'm going to sell some, keep some. And that's when we start to talk about hybrid solutions. So you might have something in a trust and something in a company, and then you have documentation between them with a development management agreement or a joint venture between yourself and yourself that basically says, well, one is taking the risk and one is doing the tax benefit.
And again, this is why it's so important to talk to your accountant, talk to your solicitor, talk to your financial advisor. This is not a one-size-fits-all.
It's not a one-size-fits-all, and every single deal is going to have its own merits as to what structure you actually go into.
Yep, makes sense. Hey, is there anything else that you're wanting to really wrap up with this one as far as freehold within 5 years, multiple freeholds potentially if you keep doing it right in 5, 6, 7 years? Is there kind of like a final words of wisdom or something that you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah, it may be a loop back to a previous episode. So we did a 7 steps episode, a 7 steps to freedom episode.
Yeah, that's right.
So what are the things that we need as prerequisites to actually get ourselves there? So understanding our starting position and where we're at from a financial position, understanding where we want to go, choosing our development strategy. When we start to map it out, we want to make sure that development strategy is scalable. Then we want to put together that 5-year plan. That 5-year plan, based on the deal size, where does that start to make sense? When I know where it makes sense, I'm then going, well, I know what to buy it for, and I know what to sell it for, and I understand my financial position, so I know the gap. Now I'm going to map out with the vendor what their circumstances are. Can I close the gap between the two? So we have to just go step by step by step through every single one. So what you're doing in those 15 hours we talked about is going to be different at every step of the process, but we just got to keep putting the process in.
And hence why it's 9 to 15 months.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
But as we can see, very doable.
And well, I just like that you don't sell it as like in 2 hours a week and like it's
No,
20 minutes.
This is not get rich quick.
Yeah.
This is get rich.
Rock hard abs and keep eating pizza.
Oh, I wish I knew the name of the celebrity that I saw that did like a breast implant, but 6-pack of abs.
I've seen that before.
And but the dude was super fat, and his 6-pack of abs are sitting on the top.
Have you seen that meme where he's got like the dudes with the big beer bellies, but they like push it up against like a fence, which is cut like.
Yeah, it's just as good.
Oh, mate. Well, anyway, speaking of which, I do need to ask you the most important question in a second. But before I do, I want an action step from you. There is a whole bunch of people listening right now that they're at the end of the episode. They're pumped by this. They're like, I've never even thought of this. What's something that they can pull out their headphones and just put into practice straight away?
I think the best action step you can do is actually start to learn the trade, educate yourself. Don't be in a hurry to get into your first deal. This is not jump on realestate.com and look for a development site. This is actually go, well, what development strategy do I want to do? What is going to be scalable? Then start to research, well, how do I actually get good at that one thing? Don't be jack of all trades, master of none, but choose one and get very, very deep in the knowledge of that.
Otherwise, you're potentially going to be the one that's going under, selling this development site super cheap that a skilled and educated developer is going to pick up and make into a profit off of your loss.
Absolutely.
Yeah, mate, I love that. And look, click the link in the show notes below. I'm sure we've got a link for a property developer network somewhere that Rob pretty much lives in a plane. I make a joke about it in the ads, but like you are flying every single week, Brisbane, Melbourne, Perth, Sydney, wherever it is. Hang out with some like-minded people. You really want to get into this. You want to make sure that you're surrounding yourself with other people that live it and breathe it as well and that have gone down the education path. But Rob, it's almost getting to dinner time anyway now, mate. And I need to ask you again the most important question of the entire show. Rob Flux, what is your favorite pizza?
Mate, I've got so many different favorite types. It has to be thin base and crispy. I don't want the fat, deep pan things.
Okay.
But a barbecue meat lovers, can't go past. Super Supreme, anything with chili, jalapenos, spicy, I liked a lot.
Spicy, okay. And but why it has to be thin? So you wouldn't go like a cheesy crust or anything from Domino's? No?
No.
Too American?
It feels good going in, and then 15 minutes later, you can feel your arteries hardening, and it's just, no.
That is actually pretty true. There's a new one now where it's actually like cheese within the entire crust, but it's like a thin crust. But yeah, probably still doesn't solve the arteries hardening part for you.
No.
Okay.
No.
Rob, I know that this has inspired a lot of people right now, mate, and for me, one of the biggest things about this is it's just got to do with the mental shift of the way that you look at what's possible. Getting back to the whole paying off $700,000 mortgage, it's insane. Trying to do that in around like 3, 4, 5 years, it's just not going to happen realistically. But doing an education piece for a year, for 9 months, 15 months, whatever it is, starting to try and put deals together, starting small, working your way up to something bigger, taking those steps and doing it in a safe manner, that feels so much more doable than $13,697 a month in mortgage repayments.
Yeah, and I'll leave everyone with a thought provoker. It's not about how many properties you own. It's how few of them you own outright.
I think that's a perfect place to end it. Rob Flux from Property Developer Network, thank you so much for jumping on the show, mate.
More than welcome, mate.